conversation series on building resilient relationships and having curious conversations. I'm Mandy Pallock, and I am here with Grace Uwizeye-Allen, who is the founder and CEO of Graceful Etiquette, which is a professional etiquette consultancy that offers training in business and social aspects with everything from dining to networking to effective communication and youth etiquette. And she helps individuals navigate those complex environments with grace, whether that's an executive filled boardroom or the family dinner table or the Sunday school classroom. So I am really glad that Grace is here. Grace, welcome.
Thank you, Mandy. I'm excited to be here. From the time that you and I have met, every single time we get together, it's just always a good time. And we have conversations and we're like, did we just meet? Because it seems like we've known one another for a lot longer than this. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, we're glad you're here because I would describe myself as a recovering awkward person. And so I'm grateful for graceful tips on how to have non-awkward conversations.
Yes, that is definitely a huge pain point for many, many people. So you, Mandy, you are not alone.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Grace, most listeners or watchers of this conversation, they're mentors that are involved in life to life ministry, everyday conversation, and they're having those everyday conversations. And they're really looking to make the most of the relationships that God brings into their lives. And so
Yeah.
we have a lot to learn from you in that regard. I was thinking about you, Grace, and when I think of you, I think of someone who is 100% present and interested in what someone has to say and share, whether like whoever that person is. And I find myself just sitting up a bit straighter and leaning in a bit more because you are the epitome of gracious and loving wisdom.
Appreciate that. I
Can
appreciate
you tell us a bit of your story? How did you become the etiquette lady?
Absolutely. So I've always had a fascination for etiquette and protocol, and some of that may have to do with my personality. I'm very much a black and white. I like looking at the details of things. And so if there are detailed instructions on something, for me, that's how I feel a little bit more confident and comfortable in my surroundings or what to expect. But it really started back to my time in the military. So I am prior Air Force and I did about 12 years in the Air Force.
Mhm.
And throughout my time, I had opportunities to work in more of that protocol capacity, and I really loved it. So, in the military, one of the things that you can always expect are there's a lot of rules, a lot of specifics on how to do everything, down to depending on the type of career field you're in, you may have a specification on how long your fingernails can be, a quarter
Mm.
inch past your fingertips. But it really breaks down exactly how you should present yourself.
Mhm.
And so, throughout my time, I noticed that something else that I had a love for was education and training. I was fortunate to be able to also work in that capacity as well at one of my duty assignments. And what I found about the beauty of people is that regardless of your circumstance or your expectations or your role, the one thing that we all share is our desire to be accepted in the areas that we're in, and
Mhm.
also our abilities to connect. And so for me, in any space that I go into, my goal is to always find what is the connection, right? Because initially, as humans, we have a tendency to look at the differences first. Oh,
Mm.
so and so isn't doing this as I'm doing it, or I don't have what so and so has. And so I challenge myself by saying, okay, what can I find that is similar? And so in
Mhm.
the military, one of the most obvious differences that we carry are rank. And
Mhm.
so typically you address people by their rank. And as a result, you have a tendency to approach certain people in certain aspects as their rank. But what I found that constantly found me was that every assignment that I would move to, people would approach me asking, hey, I noticed that you have a tendency to do this. Can you show me how you did that?
Mhm.
Or my leadership would say, okay, we have teams that we want to turn into award-winning teams. Can you help us mentor them into making sure that they are and they're ready to go to that next level?
Mhm.
And I found that that was what my purpose was, because the one thing that we can always count on as being constant is change in the military. And so with every environment that we're in, there's a new change. And so I wanted to at least keep my mission the same, which was people, because
Hmm.
programs and purposes change and processes change, but the people honestly stay the same in terms of those basic needs. And so that's what I made my mission. When I transitioned out of the military, my husband and I were both active duty, and we found ourselves in a season where we said, we've enjoyed our time, but it's now time to move into a new chapter and
Hmm.
have a little bit more constant, right? And stay in one place. And so I took some time off initially just to figure out really who I was on this side,
Hmm.
out of the uniform. What is my purpose still out of the uniform? I no longer have a set of regulations that I'm having to follow day to day. I no longer have large units of people who are counting on me to produce something or to
Hmm.
deliver. So what is my purpose now? And so with that, I did a lot of soul searching, honestly. And I'll be very transparent. This is something that I think is important for a lot of people to know. You know, things aren't perfect. And so I
Hmm.
found myself in a season for the very first time where I didn't quite know what my next steps were going to be. I
Yeah.
left the military on what I felt was like a high with all of these possibilities and skill sets and certifications. And my background was medical initially. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe that's where I'll go. But I just found myself in a space where I felt very lost.
Hmm.
And a lot of that, Mandy, I'll be completely honest with you, had a lot to do with my sense of relationship with God. When I
Hmm.
really took the time to examine how had my relationship been. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the church. My dad is a pastor. My husband's dad was previously a pastor, and the church is somewhere that I've always felt home and that centered me.
Yeah.
But I found that in the years leading up to it, my relationship with God had become very much, I would say, directional or transactional, or
Hmm.
even on a consultation basis where I treated God like, a consultant, okay,
Hmm.
God, this is what we're going to do. And
Hmm.
I'll let you know if I need anything. But otherwise, I'm sure there's a lot of people who need a lot more help, but I have it. I have my 5-year plan. I know what I'm
Hmm.
going to do next. I love a good list. I have my check boxes. So I'll let you know if I need something, not
Hmm.
realizing that actually I am one of God's biggest headaches. His children who just think they know where they're going next. We are the reason we keep him up at night, so to speak. We do. Um,
Here's to a
and
God who
so
doesn't slumber or
yes,
sleep.
that's it. It's because of me.
Ah.
Me and my people who are in that realm of no, we got it, we got it. We'll let you
Mhm.
know if we need something.
Yeah.
And I realized it became so glaringly clear where for the first time I didn't have that picture perfect checklist. And
Mm.
I realized that that was the time that I needed to be able to take a step back and really silence a lot of the noise, a lot of the chaos. But I felt lost. I felt lost. I
Mhm.
didn't know what direction I was going. But it had a lot to do with me not willing to just take a step back and listen because I never
Mhm.
felt like I needed to do that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah.
During that in between season, as I call it, honestly, my relationship with God changed for the
Mhm.
better.
Mhm.
They say it's in the broken place, it's in the hard place that you really are able to listen to that still small voice.
Right.
And so for that first time, I started to really listen to that still small voice of saying, okay, God, the
Mhm.
next thing that I'm going to do, it's going to be because you lead the way. I have
Mhm.
all of these things that I think that I should be doing, and yet somehow I'm still having these feelings of discontentment. So obviously, I will let you just, you know what, you take the wheel. You
You do
take the
it.
wheel. You let me know where I need to go next.
Yeah.
Um, and I started to really have this mantra of, I just want a peace of mind and I just want a peace of heart, and everything else will come when it's supposed to. Um,
Mhm.
and so I really started to just develop that closer relationship with God where it was me saying, okay, God, this next step that I take, it's going to be because of you. And I no longer want to be in a place where I am pointing to my accomplishments and my achievements and saying, oh, I did that because of hard work. Yes, God, you helped. But really, I mean, I did a lot of work to get here.
Yeah.
I want to always be in such a place with you where I have no choice but to be humble
Mhm.
because I don't ever want to be able to say, because of my hard work and merit, I did this, I did this, I did this. Let everything that takes place with me from here on out be so big that I couldn't possibly take the credit for. Um,
Hmm.
I'll tell you, Mandy, that's a difficult prayer to
That's a
say.
brave prayer.
But from that place, that's when I really started to say, okay, what am I going to do next?
Hmm.
And I don't want to chase anymore. I don't want to
Hmm.
chase after any more, accomplishments and certifications. Surely by now, everything that I need to go to the next step, I have it in my toolkit. I just need
Hmm.
to pay attention.
Hmm.
So I was doing, just again, also something else that a lot of people don't talk about, but I have no problem with is I also started doing therapy.
Hmm.
Often people don't realize, especially in the Christian realm, that yes, you are a Christian. Yes, God is there, but also God gives you people to help you navigate those
Yeah.
difficult chapters.
We're
And one
meant
of
to do it in community.
we are meant to
Yeah.
do it in community. He didn't put us here to do this alone. And one of those components that he gives us are amazing therapists,
Hmm.
especially if you can find a really great Christian therapist.
Hmm.
And so I also started to lean into that to just help me navigate a lot of just these feelings that I was experiencing. And so I started doing this exercise of journaling. I've
Hmm.
never really been big on journaling, but during that season, I actually picked it up. I have to admit, I don't still do it as regularly as I need to, but honestly, anytime I'm working through something difficult, I find that writing those
Way to
thoughts down
process.
really does and processing helps. And then you're also able to go back and see all of the various valleys and challenges that you have faced, as well as
Hmm.
the mountaintops, right?
Hmm.
So I started writing down all of the skills that I had currently.
Hmm.
And what were all of those gifts? Because something else that I started to really hone on in is just the the mercy that God gives us in instilling us with these inherent gifts that
Hmm.
He knows we can use to actually work for His glory and His purpose, but also our sense of purpose and glory.
Yeah.
And so I started, just journaling out and writing out what are the gifts? What are the gifts that God has given me? What are those things? And often we think, okay, well, what does that even mean? Right? We say,
Hmm.
oh, you're so gifted, but what does that mean? And
Right.
me, the definition I came up with was your gifts are those things that you do inherently with the least amount of effort, yet they seem to always have the greatest impact on
Hmm.
those around you.
Yeah.
And often we ignore those gifts because they come so easily to us. And so we feel as though that couldn't really be of value to anyone because anyone should be able to do this, right?
Hmm.
Those are those same skills that when people often comment to you about them and they say, wow, how did you do this? Or, oh my goodness, Mandy, you're always so good at doing this. I don't know how you get
Hmm.
it done. And, our response is usually, this? Really? I
Hmm.
I thought everybody can do this.
Hmm.
But no, they can't because those are your gifts.
Hmm.
So I started making a list of those gifts and I saw that well, the people were different. The message always remained the same. Grace, you always have a tendency to do this. You have your ability to do this, and it's not an ego thing by any means. It's more so, I think, for me, a recognition of the work that God has done
For sure.
um, in in creating us very intentionally,
Yes.
and understanding that we should be using those gifts to His glory. And so, with that, I decided that I was going to go into etiquette. I've always
Hmm.
loved it. I've loved protocol. And so I really started to hone in on recognizing that a lot of my gifts and my skill sets really lined up with
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
I think previously I just thought that that was something that I could, have an appreciation for, but not really
Hmm.
turn into a career or a business. And so I did, despite saying I wasn't going to get anything else, I did go back and I went to protocol school
Hmm.
and I got my certification as a business etiquette consultant as well as a children's etiquette consultant. So I am certified in both areas, but
Hmm.
I do think that that is an important aspect to have, especially if you are training others to also be technically sound. And
Hmm.
then shortly after that, Graceful Etiquette was born. And I named Graceful Etiquette. Well, yes, of course, there's a component of my name to it, right? But
Fantastic.
also, during that period, shortly after the military, I found myself in a place where I had a lot of grace extended to me. And
Hmm.
the first time I recognized that, there are some people when they show up to spaces and they show up to areas and they don't have that picture perfect look, or they don't have everything in place. Or, sometimes in your work centers, you have those people who they turn things in and, they're okay, but it could be better. And
Hmm.
recognizing that sometimes in that particular season of their life, that's the best they can do. But they
Hmm.
have chosen to get up, get dressed, and show up
Yeah.
knowing that they are still somewhat feeling as if they're in the deficit. They know
Hmm.
that they're not where they need to be, yet they have the courage to still show up.
Hmm.
And I think that there's something to be said for that. And
Hmm.
anything else after that, yes, you can work on together, but there's just that recognition that, sometimes when people show up in spaces, especially in the professional setting, and maybe they don't have their appearance all together, you at least have to recognize the courage that it took for them to still come and
Hmm.
not give up and still
Hmm.
get up.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to always make sure that that grace component is interwoven in every interaction that I have with other people.
Hmm.
Uh, because at the end of the day, we don't, but yet we still receive that dose of grace.
Yeah.
And so it's a reminder to me, but also a way for me to help others remember as well, to just apply just a little dose
Hmm.
to you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you have to completely ignore the rules or that you have to just, kind of have a laissez-faire approach.
Hmm.
But if we can just remember to have just a little bit of grace in the interactions that we have with others, we are setting ourselves up to garner so much more value out of those interactions.
Hmm. Hmm. What I love about your story as I listen to it is often we as as mentors or as people that have younger people or other individuals that we're discipling or investing in, we get this others focus, that this is and there's a space for that. But first, you went through this process of what do I love? What are my skills? What are my passions? What am I good at? What's easy for me that seems like it's hard for other people? And what's the golden thread there? And so as you're doing that with yourself first, you're in a healthy place and a healthy position to then be able to launch out into your next thing, which for you was launching a whole business, and
Yes.
it might be jumping into a volunteer role or, having that affect your parenting and what that looks like. But really the reminder that first, let's take care of ourselves and our heart before God, before we jump into investing in other people.
Yes,
Mm.
100%.
Hmm.
The saying goes, you can't help others unless you yourself have been helped. You can't fill
Hmm.
someone else's cup if yours is empty.
Yeah.
And so while sometimes it may seem like it's a little bit more of a self-centered approach, but really you're doing a disservice to others if you are trying to minister to them, if you are trying to help them walk through their journeys when you yourself don't necessarily have a sense of purpose or direction in where you're going. Um,
Hmm.
so I
Hmm.
love, Mandy, that you touched on that portion of being present.
Yeah.
And that was something else that I identified during that season was, my ability to be present and that the
Hmm.
intentionality behind being present. I found myself in a space where, because of our pace and, when you're active duty, it gets it's a little
Yeah,
hectic,
one thing and
especially
then the
if
next.
you're always. And then
Yeah.
when you add on that component of you're both active duty, and then you have children, and then you're taking care of other people, and then you also have your
Mhm.
own household that you have to do. I found myself in a place where I was constantly working and going, and my mind was moving in a million different places, but yet physically I was in a place. And sometimes I would look over at my children and they're talking to me, and I think that I'm saying uh-huh and yes in all the right places. And then they would catch me up in a little bit of that conversation because I'm like, wait, what did I just say yes to? Or
Yeah.
what did you just get out of me?
Yes.
And so I learned that in order to truly be effective in whatever it is that I'm in, I have to be there.
Hmm.
My mind, not just my body, but my mind and my soul, my spirit, it all has to be there and it has to be
Hmm. Yeah.
in order to really truly have that impact that you desire to have.
I love
And
that.
so that
I
was
love that.
something that, I'm very intentional in being present because I know that I have a capacity to, and I have a tendency to to multitask. You
Hmm.
know, I love efficiency and I love seeing how many things I can get done at one time. But when you're multitasking, we're human. It's not possible to give your 100% to every aspect of what it is that you have at hand.
Yeah.
And so I have to be mindful of stopping whatever it is that I'm thinking about, even if I'm physically present, and actually just
Mhm.
pay attention to the person in front of me and what they're saying.
We're all about building resilient relationships and
Yeah.
really deepening those connections. How do you see good manners and gracious etiquette contributing to that?
Yes. Oh, that's a great question. So, most times when you say etiquette, everyone automatically goes to the fork and the knife.
True.
Do you know which fork is yours and what is the proper place setting? Yes, there's definitely a component of etiquette that does have to do with very excellent table manners, but there's also a larger component to that. And it's
Hmm.
the idea of humanity. Right.
Hmm.
And that golden rule, treating others as you would want to be treated. That's the most simplistic explanation of etiquette, really. But really, it's the idea of understanding that in every space you're in, you can find a way to leave an impact. What
Hmm.
is your purpose in that space that you're in? I don't believe in coincidences. I believe that God places us in every scenario, in every environment for a specific reason. And what is it that you're here for in this particular place? Why am I interacting with this person? And since I'm interacting with this person, what can I do to help them feel more comfortable in the space that we're sharing?
Mm.
And what can I do to serve that other person that, God calls us to serve others? How can I serve you simply by being respectful of the conversation that we're having, taking the time to listen and actually respond and engage? That is the
Hmm.
way that I think about it when it comes to those interactions. Because, we hear conversations and can be really difficult to have, especially if you have the type of personality that maybe is just really hesitant to meet new people, or it's just maybe terrifying. You know,
Hmm.
they say, public speaking is one of the biggest fears that many face in America.
That's what they
But what
say.
a lot of people don't realize is that when you meet someone new, that is a form of public speaking. There's
Hmm.
a reason why that terrifies you. Most people think public speaking only happens on a stage. No. Every single time you have an interaction with someone, that
Hmm.
is a form of public speaking. A way to make it easier is to think about the other person, getting outside of your own head, right? Because what does anxiety do? It often traps you in your head. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm not doing this right. I'm not doing this right. Why did I just say this? What if they think about this? What if they think this of me? What if I say the wrong thing? If you notice, there's a lot of I's attached to those
Hmm.
phrases, right? There's a lot of I's. I, me. But if you can pause and think about the other person, what
Hmm.
do they need in this space right now?
Yes.
What is it that they're going through? Or what is it that they are talking about? How can I add to their conversation or what their ideas are to make it more fruitful, to make it more valuable? And
Hmm.
so that service component I use in interactions as well.
Yeah.
We talk about what the value of serving others through volunteer, but when you're speaking to someone, that is also a way that you can choose to serve others.
I love it. And so, like, I'm thinking of actionable things that you said. One thing that you started off was recognizing that the other person is made in the image of God, that they are an individual, made with wonder. So that's one thing that I heard you say. And then the other was like really diving in with a heart to serve. How can I make this person feel more comfortable, feel more at ease, feel more of themselves? Because that self is amazing, and how can you draw it out? Go
Yes,
ahead.
and that's why, you talk about volunteerism and serving others, in church we always talk about, I mean, there's so many opportunities to serve, right? And when you're sitting there, you're listening to a message or right before the pastor comes up, what is it that usually the layman or someone else in this church comes up and talks about? Service opportunities. Hey, we have this
Yes.
coming up. We need volunteers. We have this coming up. We need volunteers. You know, ser service in the Christian community, and it's interwoven within our Christian values. I
Hmm.
mean, look at Christ and the way that at every single interaction, he made it a point to serve other people.
Yeah.
And the reason that's so important is because service to others gets us out of our own heads and our
Hmm.
own bubbles. It makes us more aware of what other people are going through or what other people are bringing to the conversations or to the interactions.
Yeah.
And it also is a way to distract ourselves from our own thoughts.
Hmm.
And so when you have those anxieties of, oh, another crowded room. Oh no, here it goes. Here it goes. Oh, there's people. I don't know their faces. Here it
Hmm.
goes. Or, oh, I know them, but I really just don't want to do this and be
Hmm.
here. It gets us out of that headspace and
Hmm.
into a space where we can actually be present and enjoy those interactions. They
Yeah.
don't have to last a long time. You don't have to be there the entire time based off of who you are and how you know yourself to be. You may have a time limit, and that's okay. I actually recommend that anytime you go into spaces, have a time limit for how long those interactions are going to take place. That
Hmm.
way you can truly give it the best that you have without it overextending you and your capabilities.
Yeah, that's another wise practical tip for sure. Grace, one of the things that I appreciate about you and your message is that you tell us that manners can be learned, that
Yes.
good etiquette can be discovered, and it's a skill that can be built. And that's really encouraging for those who feel like they did not come out of the womb as a natural extrovert with amazing conversational skills. So, can you share with us some practical, actionable things that we can do to get the conversation going? What are your top three etiquette tips in a group environment?
Okay, so here they go. And I think sometimes they change every single time depending on who I'm speaking to
For
because
sure.
maybe the scenarios are different. But I would say in our particular conversation, this is one of the things I would recommend. So, taking the time to think about the space you're getting ready to enter. What is the
Mm,
purpose of why you're going? What is the purpose of that particular event or that space or that environment? What is the purpose? After
mhm,
that, then you start to think about and even write down. I recommend always writing down questions that can help bring value to that purpose or that
mm,
environment in which you're going into. So, for
mhm.
example, let's say you have been invited by a friend to attend an event. Maybe they're hosting, women's winter event, holiday
Yes.
event, or maybe there's a new study coming up that you're really interested in, but that people aspect intimidates you a little bit.
Mhm.
What are some questions that you can come up in that particular environment that would add value to that? So I like to give examples because sometimes I think that helps people.
Yes.
Let's say you've been invited to go to a holiday event,
Mhm,
maybe a women's worship night. And I'll use
mhm,
this because I was just at one at my church. So you can go in asking some questions of, have you been here before? Is
mhm,
this your first time attending an event like this? And if
mhm,
someone gives you the yes, you can ask follow-up questions or write those follow-up questions down so that you're prepared when you go in. What was it like last time you were here? How often do they do these events? Is this
mhm,
something that, is there a part that I can help with this?
mhm,
Do I have it? Is there an opportunity to volunteer or to serve in this particular event? So writing down those questions so that when you get into that space, you already know how those interactions are going to play out. While yes, you cannot predict what people respond to when it comes to those questions, you can at least anticipate some possible pivots in the conversation.
mhm,
I always say focus on events, ideas, try to minimize the focus on people,
mm,
right? So minimizing the focus on yourself.
mhm.
Go into those new interactions. The human tendency is to focus on what you know the most, which is you, right?
Yes.
But you're with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no need to continually talk about you all the time. So that's when you can focus on events, focus on ideas.
Yeah.
Another tip that I have is if you're looking for those conversation starters, think about events that are coming up in the circles that you're going to,
Mhm,
taking the time to look at some current events. I always recommend for my professionals looking at the business journal and seeing some highlights about the city and what's going on in the city. Even
mhm,
if you're going into a social setting, that still applies. because you're in the city that you live in. And
Yeah.
so taking an interest in what's going on around you in that city is always a great way to start those conversations off. So maybe taking the time to do a quick review. Well, if you're going to a new church, you've been invited to a new church, or maybe it's your particular church, take some time to do some research on upcoming events that are taking
Hmm.
place that you can bring up in conversation. Hey, I saw that this is coming up. Have you all been to this before? Or, oh, I saw that they just opened up this particular initiative. Are you planning
Hmm.
on being a part of that initiative? And let the conversations flow from there. Often people haven't taken the time to do the research, so you're actually bringing in a value piece there because you're bringing new information to that particular
Hmm.
conversation. So that is I would say my second tip. So
Yes.
the first tip, taking the time to understand why you're going, what the purpose
Hmm.
of you being there is, and the purpose of that event. The second tip, taking some time to do some research about where you're going or the event in which you're going in. And then the third tip I would say is set your time limits. And I mentioned this before, but no, especially if you're someone who has a tendency to just want to shy away from it, if you know that you have a start and stop time, then mentally it helps you really, I would say, present yourself in the best way because you know that there's an end to this. It's not going to be continuous and it's not going to be drawn out and long. So
Yeah.
set a time limit. How long do you plan to be there? If
Hmm.
the event is 2 hours and maybe because the actual program piece is maybe an hour and a half, okay, you can arrive typically about 15 minutes prior. That way you're only having to speak to a few people before you have to get in your seats.
Hmm.
And then you plan to stay about 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes after to then see if you can meet some new people or even taking the time to see who's sitting next to you and have a
Hmm.
conversation about the program that just took place. And then you're done. After that, you can go home and recharge and refresh, and you're ready for the next event. So those would be my top three.
Yeah, those are so helpful. Those are so helpful. What if someone would say, I'm more of an extrovert or I'm more of an introvert? What should those different personality types maybe keep in mind as they're jumping into a group conversation?
So if you are an introvert, you may have a tendency to want to disappear from conversations, which can have a way of making you seem as though you're not interested.
Hmm.
Most often, it's not because you're not interested in an interaction that's taking place. You're probably just in your head. You're
Yeah.
trying to think about the next thing you're going to say. You're trying to make sure that it's not going to sound odd or it's not going to be off. You might start to look for the exit because maybe you're just getting a little too anxious. But regardless, you're in your head, which means you're probably not present for
Hmm.
those interactions. You're not talking. And so the people who are in that area with you may think that you don't care, you're not interested, you're aloof.
Hmm.
So that is a blind spot, I would say, for introverts that you really have to be mindful about.
Hmm.
Now, I don't recommend just saying, uh-huh, yep, uh-huh, to show that you're present. Maybe just using some nonverbals, nodding your head when someone is speaking to let them know that you're still present, you're still there. Also, taking the time to ask follow-up questions as well. So in this particular instance, you're not necessarily having to be the one to come up with all new questions. You're just, as they say, piggybacking or following up on something that someone just said. Either way, it's showing that you're present in the conversation, which can be a really big blind spot for introverts. For extroverts, on the other hand, they're just so excited to be there. They're excited to be there. They're excited to add value. They want everyone else to have a great time in the space that they're in. But what extroverts have a tendency to do is to interrupt a lot because they just want to show that they are just as excited as you are. So often, what they think is adding value to conversations by saying, oh, yes, me too, or oh my goodness, okay, so this just happened to me as well, can actually come off as quite rude because you're not allowing other people to talk. You're not allowing them to finish their thoughts, especially when you have an introverted, extroverted interaction. It might have taken that introvert a really long time to just get to that thought and then say it and hope that it lands well. And you jumping in and interrupting them can actually completely take them off of the course or maybe intimidate them and say, okay, this is too much. So
Hmm.
for extroverts, I would recommend allowing everyone who is talking to complete their thought. Sometimes the idea is, well, what if I forget what I'm going to say? something new will come up. It's okay. Most extroverts have the ability to just call up more topics and more information. Something else that extroverts have a tendency to do that may be considered a blind spot is wanting to also let them know that they've done that too, or me too, right? Oh, that happened to me too. Oh my goodness, this happened, and oh, I went there too. And you can come off as though you're a one-upper a little bit.
Hmm.
As an extrovert, you may think that no, I'm just adding to the conversation, or oh, well, it's okay to allow an experience to just be that person's experience, even if you've done it as well,
Hmm.
even if you've been there too, because you're wanting to make sure that you're gauging how many times you're turning the conversation back to you. So every single time you say me too, or I did that too, you're actually diverting the conversation back to you. And
Hmm.
so when we talk about interactions are supposed to be about other people, other thoughts, other ideas, let's minimize the amount of times that you turn it back to you.
Hmm. I love that. And as you're sharing, I'm thinking about how these thoughts also would help me or support me or someone who's then in a group environment with an introvert or with an extrovert and really wanting to support them, support the introvert in a group setting, support the extrovert so that they can learn how to let other people share too and
Right.
kind of discover what that looks like in a mentoring context.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's always the idea of what can I do for the other person?
Yeah, yeah. I love it. Grace, we love stories. We really do. Can you tell us, share a time when you had to navigate a particularly tricky conversational situation? What did you learn as you navigated that?
Oh my goodness. So this actually just happened recently. Um, I'm actually, most people would be surprised to know I'm an introverted extrovert.
Hmm.
When most people have interactions with me, they just assume I'm an extrovert, but I'm actually not. I still enjoy my quiet time. I enjoy my
Hmm.
sometimes I book days on my schedule that are called no people days,
Love
where
it.
I know that I don't have to talk to anyone other than, my family in my house.
Hmm.
But one of the things that I had recently was an interaction where it was actually just an example of what I spoke about with the extrovert piece.
Hmm.
We're in a conversation, and it was three of us total. And I could tell the dynamics, and I think this is probably also just a hazard of my particular career. I could tell that the dynamics, it was three of us, and there was an extrovert, and an introvert, and then I was kind of in the middle.
Here you
And
are.
I and it almost felt like a sparring match where you
Mhm.
could tell that the introvert was just really trying to stay in the conversation, but one foot was going out. And the extrovert, I think, was just happy to be there and was just trying to add to the conversation. But what I noticed was the conversation kept getting steered back to what I would call kind of a negative, right? It was more of a
Mhm.
complaint in nature. It was one of those, okay, yes, we're here, but oh my goodness, it just took so much time to get here, and oh, the
Mhm.
traffic is crazy, and people, it was just it was on along that vein.
Mhm.
And so I was having to really try to steer it away from that negative piece of, okay, but we're here now, right? Like, let's just enjoy the time that we're in. And oh, so what are you looking forward to for this particular piece? And I
Mhm.
think the introvert was also trying to get onto that.
Mhm.
And the other party just kept going back to, the negatives of how
Mhm.
long it took and why they're there. And oh, it's going to be, crazy getting out of this parking lot. And so
Mhm.
that was a little bit of a tricky scenario, I
For
would
sure.
say. And this maybe is a simple example, but it happens quite often, especially for people who have a tendency to dominate a
Mhm.
conversation because it keeps going back to something negative.
Yes.
And so at one point, I honestly, I had to be a little bit more direct and say, hey, I know it was a lot getting here, but we're here now.
Yeah.
Let's focus on just enjoying the time that we're here, because I know that a lot of us, it took us a lot to get here. We
Yes.
only have the 2 hours we're here, and then we're back to our day to day. And I know that I've been looking forward to this all day. So I think we should just focus on what we have going on today. Um,
Mhm.
so it was a little uncomfortable. I have to be honest with you, Mandy, because you
Mhm.
don't want to be that guy, right? Or that person who's like,
Yeah.
okay, but here we are,
Yes.
cutting it off at somewhere. But
Yeah.
at some point, that can be a little bit disparaging when, you're
Hmm.
constantly, just, I say all of the things of your day to day are bearing you. And for me, I love when I get an opportunity to go to church, especially during the week. We have our weekend time, but also during the week because I feel like it's a battery recharge
Hmm.
and it's a little bit of a reprieve from our day-to-day hectic time and personally, just selfishly, I wanted to be able to enjoy that, you know,
Hmm.
without
Hmm.
having to manage, so to speak, someone else's emotions or feelings
Yeah.
about just getting there.
Yeah.
So I would say that that was probably an example that it just happened. So
I love it. And it's such a great example because it's the kind of scenario that we get into all the time.
yes,
And I love it. And it goes back to understand your purpose. Like what's your purpose of this gathering? Your purpose of the gathering is not to talk about the weather and the traffic. Those can get
yes.
the conversation started, but the purpose is to go deep and invest in these two individuals and if you're always staying over here you won't get to that deep part. So knowing your purpose meant you were okay with the awkward of saying, "Hey, I'm here to talk about this." And that's a really good thing.
And so
Hmm.
I would say,
Hmm.
from an etiquette standpoint, don't be afraid. Say it with kindness, right?
Hmm.
Extend the grace of acknowledging that particular complaint. But we're here now. I'd love to be able to talk about why we're here and some of the events coming up.
Hmm. Wise words. I made a deal with myself, or I set a rule for myself years ago, which was if I am not willing to address an issue, then I'm not allowed to be upset about it.
Oh, that is good.
It's so helpful for me because my personality is to let the conversation, oh, maybe this will be the last time she brings it up, or maybe this is the last time that conversation like that. Maybe this will be it. And if I just smile and
Yes.
nod, then we can get onto it. But I've realized then I'll stew in it afterwards, which also isn't healthy. And so
Right.
recognizing, wait, if I'm not willing to engage in that situation, I'm not allowed to be upset about it afterwards. And that's a really healthy thing for me.
That is really good. I may have to borrow that one
Borrow
from you.
away.
And I'll even cite my source.
Yes, 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 absolutely. Grace, how do you see cultural differences coming into play? And how do we be mindful of those differences in ministry or family settings?
So one, and you'll hear me go back to this research. Why research?
Mm,
Research shows intentionality and purpose. Have you ever been in an interaction with someone where you just like, they just seem to always just have it,
mm,
right? Or they just, I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but they just always seem to know what to say or how to go about something.
mhm,
And often it's not because they're perfect and it happens effortlessly. There's probably some work that had to go into that or some
mhm,
time that had to go into that. And really at the heart of it all, that's what etiquette is about, intention.
mhm,
Taking the time to either learn the new skill or refine the current skill that you have. So when you're applying that to a cultural setting where maybe you're going into an environment that you're going to interact with someone from a particular culture, taking the time to research what are those social rules in that particular culture? What are some social
mhm,
norms in that particular culture? And also wanting to make sure that you are not bringing in any negatives or faux pas or inadvertently offending someone in a way because you didn't take the time to just do a little bit of research.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and so I would say that would be a really good way to make sure that when you're going into those interactions, you are leading into them with confidence because you already have a little bit of background knowledge. I'm not saying to go in and start from the history of time of when that particular
Do a
civilization
dossier on them.
you need. Often you
Right.
can really just Google cultural norms for
Hmm.
this area. You don't even have to
Yes.
get country specific. You can say this area.
Hmm. Yeah.
People appreciate that. They do.
Hmm.
They appreciate it because they understand that you've taken the time because you care. The
Hmm.
best way that you can show someone that you care is with your time. Time is the
Hmm.
one aspect of our lives that we just can't seem to really place enough value on. It doesn't have
Hmm.
a price. And so when someone is giving you their time, understand that they're giving you the best, most valuable thing that they have. And
Yeah.
so how are you going to steward that time and how are you going to treat it? And so
Hmm.
I think the best approach is with intention.
Yeah, I love that. And with that intentional research, you're not pressuring someone else and assuming they're going to be the one to bring you that information,
That's right.
which is so important. Instead, you're coming with that, with a little bit of preparation and thought and care, which expresses a bunch.
It does. And people can tell. They
Hmm.
can tell when you've taken that just that little bit of time and they appreciate it.
Yeah.
And often you will be reciprocated with the same amount of time or value to that
Hmm.
conversation as well.
For sure. Grace, you also work with young people, with students and children. How can we teach the next generation to value kindness and courtesy in their communication?
So one of the first things that I talk about, one of the first aspects that I talk about in my lessons. So when I have children and I'm, doing my children's courses, our very first day, I hit them with it's not about you. And
Mm,
as you can imagine, sometimes their eyes are like, wait, what? I've never heard this before. You're introducing a foreign concept. Well, often with children, we as adults have a tendency to make them think that the world revolves around them. And sometimes you'll hear this complaint, sometimes there's people who don't like to be around children because children have a tendency to center everything back on them. And, they may not be as mindful of what conversation is taking place and they want to interrupt with whatever thought process they have. But
mhm,
let's think about it from a child's perspective. What do we as adults have a tendency to do every time a child enters the room? We stop and we remark on whatever it is they're doing, whatever it is they're saying. And we typically have a tendency to make it a little more exaggerated as well,
mhm,
right? Mandy, when you walk into the room, I may say, oh my goodness, I love your necklace. It is
mhm,
Love that. I might even do a follow-up question and say, okay, do you mind sharing where you purchased it? Because that is something that
mhm.
you should ask. You shouldn't just assume everyone wants to tell you where they purchased their items, right?
Yes.
But then that's it, right? But what happens when a child walks into the same necklace? Oh my, I just love your neck. It is so pretty. Oh
Mhm.
my goodness, it just makes your eyes sparkle. We just go on and on
We
and
make a
on.
big deal out
We
of it.
make a big deal out of it. And so it gives the impression to the child that, oh, the world does revolve around me because every time I walk into a room, everything stops.
Hmm.
Children are so intelligent. And regardless of their age, they're still those humans. And they know, they can sense, they can tell when you're being genuine, when you're not being genuine about something as
Hmm.
well. So I often tell children, okay, you are a part of the world, you are not the world, and you are not the center of the world. So
Hmm.
every time you walk into a new space and into a new area, how can you add value to the area or to the space that you're in? It's a team as effort, it's a team aspect, and you are a team member in your
Hmm.
family. You are not the center of your family. You are a part of your family. If you have a mom and a dad and siblings, you are a part of that dynamic. So, how can you add value to that dynamic? When you are at the table, instead of leading with talking about yourself and your day, I want you to ask everyone else about their day first. And you have to include a follow-up question.
Hmm.
So, you don't get to just say, Mom, how was your day? Okay, good. This is what I did. No, you have to ask a follow-up question, which means you have to actually really listen to what is it they're saying so that you know what type of questions to ask after. So that
Hmm.
is what I challenge my children with is letting them know that you are a part of the environment that you're in. You have a responsibility to make that environment better than you left it because that's how we make a better place is being purposeful about making those areas that we're in much better than when we came into them. And then
Hmm.
also, how can you add value to someone else's day? Children are often so surprised to find out that adults actually also have days and sometimes have bad days and good days and we experience emotions like they're
Hmm.
especially parents. Children are very surprised to, know that parents actually care about what their children think of them. They're
Hmm.
like, really? So telling them or asking them, how was your day, mom? How was your day, dad? Well, what was the best part of your day, dad? What was the worst part of your day? Or what was the hardest part of your day?
Hmm.
That you can go a really long way into making sure that you as a child know that your parents care about you, but also your parents want to know that you care about them just a little bit.
Hmm.
So that's how I usually lead my courses is let's think about others. Let's think about where we're at. How can we add? You will receive. Trust me, you will receive and you will get, and someone will give, but how can you help someone else?
So good. So good. For someone who is just starting to focus on improving their communication, their manners and etiquette, where would you recommend they begin?
Oh, that's great. I would recommend that they begin with inside with their family.
Hmm.
If you live alone, then I would go to your closest friends and ask them. This is a little bit hard, okay? So I'll tell you, this isn't the easiest thing to do, but for adults, I would say ask the people closest to you what your tendencies are.
Hmm.
It's hard to know what to work on if you don't know what to work on.
Hmm.
And it's not saying that you think you're perfect, but there's a reason we call them blind spots. It's because it's something that you see or that you have a tendency to do. So
Yes.
maybe, so starting with Mandy, okay, you and I, we talk on a daily basis. We're around one another all of the time. Can you tell me just two? Give yourself some grace.
There you
You don't have
go.
to
Let's
ask
be
them to make
specific.
don't ask them to make a huge list because maybe after a while you might start to wonder, why are we friends again?
Yes.
Uh, but just asking, what are two or three things that I have a tendency to do and I don't realize that I'm doing
Hmm.
when I'm talking to you?
Hmm.
And then work on that. It might very well be. Sometimes I feel like when we start talking, your head just goes somewhere else.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize I did that. I actually thought I was trying to think about what to tell you next.
Hmm.
So thank you for that. So then in that aspect, okay, so I probably need to work on my outward appearance in terms of my nonverbals, in terms of, okay, so making sure that Mandy still knows that I'm a part of the conversation using those follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Or your friends or your family members, they're really good at being honest, will say, you have a tendency to one up everything.
Hmm.
Really? I didn't realize I did that. And you might generally not realize that. Okay, so next time I'll just let your experience be your experience and take a little bit more time to listen. So those are
I've done
just the
that too. I've totally let myself one up. Haha.
yes. See, look, and I
Yeah.
love that you just did that because did you see
Yes.
what I did? Like, yeah, uh-huh. So as you kind of lose your train of thought.
Very
I
much
love that you
so.
did
Very
that.
much so. You were gracious
That was
there.
great. That was great. I love that. But yes, so that is, and it sounds so simple, Mandy, but often we get overwhelmed and we start to think about, oh, I'll never get to this, or I'll never achieve this, or oh, I'm gonna have to go and get a certification in something in order to be really good at it. It starts small. It really
Mhm.
does. It can start very simple, working just on one step at a time, taking it one piece, one bite at a time. You know, yes, can you go and read and check out all of these books and buy all these books and download them on being a better communicator? Absolutely, absolutely. Like I see the one behind you, the question habit, which I'm sure was intentional actually in you setting it back there. But there's
Yes.
books just like that that are really phenomenal at
Hmm.
helping you understand how you can have better interactions and are you asking the right questions to actually get to know people a little bit better. You can
Yes.
definitely do that. But if
Yeah.
you're just looking for an easy, measurable step in the right direction, you can just start with who you have closest to you
Hmm.
and just work on those skills. Once you feel
Hmm.
like you've mastered them, the best way to check is to go back to those same people and say, hey, have you noticed a change? Obviously don't do it in like one day and then be like, how about now?
Yeah.
I get that. Give it a few weeks, maybe about a month or so, and then go back and ask. And if they are saying, yeah, actually, I've noticed you don't really interrupted the way you used to. Perfect.
Hmm.
So then you can go to someone else this time and say, hey, are there tendencies that I have that I could work on? And then you can just focus on just those two to three each time.
Hmm. I love it. It's intentional and it's measured,
Yeah,
and it's with people that you love and trust. And
that's it.
so, and also that you're with the most that you care about and you want to build those relationships with. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We
Mhm.
have a tendency to treat those that we don't interact with as often better than the ones that we see on our day to day,
Yes.
similarly to how we have a tendency to take God for granted because he's with us all the time. I don't really need to
Hmm.
tell you about my day, God. You were there. You
Hmm.
knew I was going into that, right? Or I don't really need to, get in, I don't need to ask you, God, what is it that I have a tendency to do? Because you're with me all the time. I want to make sure that I'm doing, my best for others. But we can have that exact same conversation as well with God and saying, okay, God, what
Hmm.
is it that I have a tendency to do? And he will show you. He's very good at that. He's
Mm-hmm.
very, very good at that. You
Yeah.
know, how can I be a better servant for you?
Mm-hmm.
One of my challenges that I have in my own interactions with others is, okay, God, let them see you through me. I don't want to have to tell someone I'm a Christian. I want that to show in my interactions. And if they bring it to me, then they bring it to me. If it comes up and it's organic and there's a mention, for example, Mandy, you and I, we talk about it, but sometimes it can be a little bit like, oh, I don't know if they're Christians and I don't want to offend, or sometimes people can just know who you are simply by the way that you interact with them. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, that's the way that I challenge myself, is let them see you through me.
Yeah.
Am I representing you, Lord, in the best way that you've created me to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
in that? And then I just, I go from there.
I love it. And so, not just asking a loved one, a trusted one, hey, what are some areas that you see that I can improve in here from a communication perspective, but actually asking Jesus that same question and
That's
saying,
it.
and absolutely, because he'll answer questions like that. Yeah. Grace, how do we connect with you and your work?
Oh, absolutely. So you are welcome to always go on my website, www.gracefuletiquette.com.
Mhm.
You also can connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Type in Graceful Etiquette, and then you will find me as well. And I love those interactions.
Super fantastic. So, Graceful Etiquette on all the socials or
Gracefuletiquette.com.
gracefuletiquette.com. We'll do
That's
it.
it. That's
Thank you
it.
so much for your gracious
And
life and for sharing your time with us so gracefully.